Hello and welcome to the quick tutorial for the CSS Selector Capture extension. My name is Charlton. I'm a front-end developer based in Sydney and the author of this free extension. In this tutorial, I'll quickly introduce the extension, walk through the UI layout, and demonstrate how you would typically use the extension in a few sites. Feel free to skip the next short intro and jump straight to the demonstration part. This hobby project is actually taken from a data scraping prototype I built a while back, and until recently I decided to do it in a proper production standards. It's a personal effort from start to finish, that is determining the requirements and features, design and coding. And on that note, I'm thankful for Google Material Design, which saved me a lot of time in putting together the interface. Though the extension is tested heavily in the browser and unit tests, there are always possible edge cases that haven't been accounted for. So in case you bump into any issue or bug, please submit in the GitHub page and let me know. So what this plugin primarily does are showing you the selector path when you mouse over an element without opening the DevTool. Meanwhile, it highlights the target and any matches that fit the profile of the selector path. And on top of that, it allows you to interact with the selector to find other relevant matches in the page. As a Chrome extension, lots of consideration are taken in mind for potential things bleeding in or out. For instance, the CSS style, the DOM element, the event, etc. It's almost completely self-contained. The app element and any global events are removed when app is removed. Shadow DOM and custom components are used to make sure the style doesn't bleed in or out. The only persistent asset is a custom namespace add font face declaration style, which is part of the content script. Alright, let's walk through the UI layout. There are two main layouts. One is within the page and one appears when you click the extension icon. At the top, we have a bar very similar to a toolbar. It contains the selector path, which is based on the element that you hovered on. Next, we have the stats, which shows you three numbers. How many overlays are in the viewport, how many overlays match the selector. It may include the originated hover target or it may not. And finally, how many match ones are invisible or hidden. And on the far right, we have a shortcut to two buttons. One allows you to copy the selector and the other one allows you to lock or unlock the overlays. And then below we have the overlays. One is the element that you hover, and then the rest is match elements depending on the selector path. Notice the mouse over overlay, we have a triple dots button that opens up a settings dialog. And also keep in mind that in this screenshot, we don't have any matches. As you can see, we can open the settings either from the extension icon pop-up or from the triple dots below. Settings are almost identical and are pretty straightforward. The only difference is that in pop-up, you don't need to save when a change is made. You will notice the extra save and copy buttons are at the top of the dialog. There are two switches in the dialog worth mentioning. First, we have the lock highlight switch. So what it does is when it's locked, the highlight stays in the same position when you scroll or mouse over another element. And auto run just means the extension will auto start when page loads. The rest of the settings are related to the actual selector, which is better off if I show you during the demonstration. Assume you already have the extension installed and turned on. You should see the extension icon appear next to the address bar. If I click the icon, you won't see the enable app switch because there's no URL or there's no page loaded. at this point, you are only allowed to change the generic settings here, and it will be saved and take into account when the page loads. Let's try Google homepage to demonstrate the extension. If we click the extension icon, we can now see that the enable app switch, and by default it is not on. To enable the app, we can either enable it manually like so, or turn on the auto run switch so that it is automatically enabled when you open a page. It is entirely your preference, but in this example we will just enable it manually. Similarly, for disabling the app, we can either go to the pop-up again and flip the switch off, or we can disable it via exit key or right click. First, we need to open up the dialog to set a few settings. Note that we can always close the dialog by clicking outside the dialog or via the close button. First thing we can do is set the selector alignment. Depending on the hover element position, we can always align the selector to the bottom for convenience. But be aware of special occasion where when it's aligned to the bottom and when you hover over links, Chrome takes priority and the link URL will appear on top instead. Another thing we can do with the selector is copying it by clicking the copy button. And if we try the selector in the console, for example, document.query selector all, and if we paste in the selector that we just copied, and it should return the element. The selector can either be copied from the dialog here or in the selector bar here. The difference is when you scroll down so far down the page, you probably lost track of where your hover element is, and that's when the copy button at the top comes in use. Now the selector you see here is CSS based for display simplicity, and it's not supposed to be in use in JavaScript because it may contain meta characters that need to be escaped. However, when you copy it, it has been escaped and it's ready to be used as string in JavaScript. The selector here may seem overwhelming at first because it is by default in verbose mode. That means it is generated all the way up to the body tag. We can simply shorten it by switching the verbose mode off, and you can immediately see the difference. So this is useful, for example, when the element has a unique ID. Sometimes we want to exclude ID or class or nChild for the hover element by default in order to find similar matches. We can simply toggle the include options to turn off the selector into something less unique. Let's say if I turn off the nChild flag here, it will reflect right away on the selector, and since the hover element has an ID and class, the same principle will apply. However, do keep in mind that the include option is only available in verbose mode. Let's demonstrate how we can fiddle with the selector to find matches. Apart from the include option in the verbose mode we showed earlier, we can also flexibly interact with the selector path to toggle the partial on and off. For simplicity, we use Google Images as an example. We'll search a simple term, say material button. When we hover over different images, we notice that the image is inside an anchor tag. We also notice that the variation for the selector for different images is in the nChild partial, 2 levels above the image tag and 1 level above the anchor tag. Let's go ahead and log the highlight first. So let's go ahead and log the anchor tag first, and we'll go ahead and switch off that nChild. So it's one level above the anchor tag. And all of a sudden we see heaps of highlight overlays appear for the match elements, and the stats also gets updated. As I mentioned earlier, the overlay is isolated from the hover target rather than setting the element background directly. If we resize or scroll, these highlights will get updated, and so will the stats. Let's try scrolling, and you will see what I mean. When we scroll the window, we can see the overlays are updating their position, and when we scroll to the bottom, we can see there are a bunch of lazy loader element being added to the page. So let's see. So we have like 299, 399. And if we click the lazy load button again, we'll see the numbers jumps to 500. Apart from the increased number of match overlay in the stats, we can also see the overlays are keeping up to date with the lazy loaded element being added to the page. In the case of resizing, if we resize the window, we can also see the overlays are adjusted. This will be useful when, say, when you have a responsive page where elements are changing size and even visibility. There is also one particular scrolling scenario you want to know, which is in a overflow container. For example, we will try to scroll the tags below the search bar, and I'll also turn off the end chart to select all matches. So let's select the end tags first, and then we'll turn off the end chart to select all the matches. Now let's click the arrow to scroll, and we can see that the overlays and the stats updates as per usual. Beware, there are edge cases where the selector or overlay is not going to behave exactly as you would hope. In particular, the selector only selects direct element from the page, which means it won't select element within an iframe or SVG, nor it will select the text node as a direct child to the body tag, because there's no tag and therefore no selector. Apart from that, the overlay position won't get updated when you simulate a scroll by transform translate. And for now, the extension does not support synchronizing the settings across different devices, considering the small number of settings we have. However, it might be possible in the future release. So this wraps up the tutorial. I hope you enjoy using the extension, as there is quite a bit of effort to make sure the extension is clean and intuitive to use. Also, feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn and share your thoughts on the extension. Again, please submit issues in the GitHub page in case you bump into any bug or inconsistency. Thank you, and bye now.